$2 billion wasted. How much do you know about the Regina bypass land scandal? Did developers really influence the location? Why did the RCMP close the file with forensic audit? Saskatchewan, it's time to ask yourself, where did the money go? Consider this. In 1990, BC's 324-kilometer Coquihalla Highway was built through mountains, over caverns, and alongside whitewater rivers for $848 million. The 40-kilometer Regina bypass, built partly around the city on level prairie terrain, has cost more than $2 billion. How can such a comparatively straightforward project flush away so much Saskatchewan taxpayer money? The majority of the Regina bypass's highly suspect land transactions have flown far under the radars of publicly funded watchdog agencies for far too long. It's time you learn the truth in the new book, Highway Robbery, the Regina Bypass Land Scandal. Be informed. HighwayRobbery.org.
So we see what's been happening in our province, in Saskatchewan, in the last decade. We're a classic example of what can happen to someone if you take the government on because of what they do to people. This was the location of our business that we had started construction of our plant in 2010. So here we are today. We have less than a fifth of our expansion plans in play because the bypass took the very front of our property and the back of our property midway through construction. So people have asked me, why do I want to enter politics? Entering politics is the last thing I've ever wanted to do. But multiple impacts to our business, our neighbors, friends. I've witnessed how bureaucracy became a puppet of private developers who have purchased land along the Regina bypass route. They made excessive profits by using their influence to have existing plans for the new bypass changed to serve their interests at the expense of everyone else. Others like ourselves were forced to abandon investments we have made on previously approved plans that we assured would never change. Even the staff of engineers of the Ministry of Highways did not agree with the location of the Regina bypass. They told us that private land developers had influenced the final decision when we interviewed them. Others who were affected were left out of the consultation process. In the last 8 years, many things have happened to our family business as a result of these changes. Our willingness to confront our government, ask difficult questions, and fight for our survival and fair treatment has won us no friends with the current administration. We have sent countless letters to our government and published articles in an attempt to expose the truth behind the local land transactions surrounding the Regina bypass. We have tried to meet with Premier Brad Wall. We were rebuffed and threatened with allegations of slander. Shortly after this, my sister and partner in the family business collapsed in my arms, just finishing a letter to Brad Wall. A career-ending stroke paralyzed her half the body. We can now only speculate that the stresses were subjected to her in her attempts to help us salvage our business plan contributed to her present condition. Now, 5 years later, her life has been irreparably harmed and altered. she can no longer provide the valuable function that she contributed to our business. She did not deserve that. I tell my story in the book that is being published that's titled Highway Robbery, the Regina Bypass Land Scandal. Over 100 people have been impacted, landowners along the Regina Bypass route, to last-minute revisions to a plan that we had all been assured that would not change. Not only did the plan change dramatically, so did the predicted expense. Saskatchewan taxpayers have handed over a bill for over $2 billion, which is roughly 5 times the original cost. With that kind of financial burden, our present government has decided to increase the PST and apply it to construction labor and other things in order to offset this debt. As a result, they effectively kneecap the entire construction industry in our province. We have seen record number of businesses, closures, and abandoned buildings in our commercial industrial business areas. We now have fewer suppliers, fewer service providers, and fewer support industries than we did just 2 years ago. When we came back to the bypass project, we discovered that a few private sector investors and developers appeared to have persuaded the government officials to revise the bypass plans to serve their personal interests. We also know that land values appear to have been manipulated. This resulted in a select few private individuals with strong connections in the government making windfall profits from the resale of land that they had recently been owned by the province to begin with. These properties were sold back to us, all Saskatchewan taxpayers, for up to 80 times their original appraised value. Finally, to complete the circle of fiscal mismanagement, these clandestine business deals resulted in a revised plan that failed to meet many of the original intentions and objectives for the bypass that had been intended from the offset. To add further controversy, the construction contract that was then awarded to a foreign company which had a documented record of collusion, money laundering in Europe. What we have left is a partially completed infrastructure that does not serve many of the needs for which it was intended, and has cost taxpayers more than the Coquihalla Highway project in BC. We are asking all taxpayers in Saskatchewan to join us in asking the question, where did the money go? We have been advocating for a fair judicial inquiry and a forensic audit into this entire debacle for more than 8 years. The NDP have only lately gotten on board to echo these demands. Where were they during the times that we reached out to them and to our present government for answers? With the provincial election looming, they have finally decided to focus on this 8-year scandal and demand some answers. We have presented them with many questions over the last 8 years, thousands of pages of information from all the research that we have done over the last 8 years. We have received very few meaningful replies. In fact, in the last 6 months, we have received 3 emails, one being one line that we're looking into it. This is really concerning to many people. Here we have a government that is given us the largest scandal in Canadian history. And we have a government party that's supposed to be the opposition that doesn't even want to talk about it. We note that our campaign flyer was distributed to all the residences in my constituency only a week before the leader post reported Ryan Miley was now asking some questions. We have been asking both the present government and the NDP leaders over the entire time. This appears to be conspicuous coincidence. While distinguishing on the part of the opposition, at least it serves to finally put this issue in the public radar. We think it's time we demanded accountability and transparency in government on all levels, on both sides of the political spectrum. I want to share with you some details from the many hours of research and several years of request answers that we've experienced. There are many questions that we all need answers to. Two Regina mayors, Michael Fougere and Pat Diaco, served on the Regina Economic Development Board along with Mr. Murad El-Khatib. When Mr. Khatib purchased 500 acres of land along Tower Road, there were apparently convergent patterns and for several conflicting issues. Why did our government facilitate land deals surrounding the global transportation hub? Well, two developers were connected to MLA Bill Boyd, one who actually rented farmland to him. And they pocketed $11 million flipping land that the government knew that they would need long before the speculators purchased it. Excuse me. Under Deputy Premier and Minister responsible for the GTH, Bill Boyd's oversight resulted in speculators inflating land prices to several levels, 20 times higher than anyone else was offered for the same land. Why did developer Bill Boyd what was his connection? Another question that needs to be asked is, why did developers from White City, Maury Gwynn, buy land from the government and pay $20,000 an acre to build a berm and sell off a portion of this land to the same government for $400,000 an acre 3 years later? What is the rationale for raw land values of this type varying from $500 an acre to $400,000 an acre, especially when others have similar land expropriated for values that were far less? According to the government's own studies, the highways engineers claimed only 15% of the truck traffic is destined for the southern part of Regina and beyond. The majority of the inbound traffic of freight is destined to the northwest industrial section of the city, where there is aging infrastructure so badly needed of upgrading. The portion of Ring Road that serves this area is becoming more crowded and hazardous every year. This constantly requires maintenance and repair. So who really benefited from the Regina bypass going south around the city where development is still in its infancy? Does this have anything to do with the developers and who the developers are, or the influence they are able to yield or wield? We challenged our government to reason with us. We appealed by petition to MLAs requesting Her Majesty's loyal opposition before they began the Regina bypass, asking them for a second sober look and to bring it up in the legislature in 2014. The NTP did not bring up the petition in the legislature then. And now have only decided that with an election booming, they are finally asking the questions that we have posed to them for over 8 years. Until now, we have been the recipients of gaslighting responses from the opposition that we have received from current ruling party. It makes anyone who studies these issues realize that the politics can obscure principles and ignore social responsibilities until it's expedient or advantageous to do so. Ever since the Grant Devine administration, we have seen exponential deterioration of government transparency and accountability. The Devine $1 million scandal was professionally investigated and resulted in criminal charges and consequences for 11 MLAs. It seems like this lesson has been forgotten. I'm hoping to remind our elected officials that they cannot escape public scrutiny when the optics demand explanation. We now have a $2 billion question of mass-produced mistakes and apologies, along with a smokescreen and a disappearing act performed by those who were entrusted with the stewardship of our resources. Maybe the real crime is committed by the accomplice who was willing to look the other way and travel down the path of least resistance. I am urging us all to avoid that path. We should not become accomplices to the mismanagement and collusion that have produced a damaged economy and massive debt for which we are all on the hook. In natural law, the path of least resistance that causes electricity and cash to flow, however, is also the same path that makes rivers and people crooked. For that, they did a segment of politicians and developers should be exposed to public scrutiny and possible criminal sanctions. We hope that there remains honorable people who continue in covenant with the oath of office and wish to distinguish themselves by fidelity to their promise. We also hope that there are elected officials who will have the courage to stand up and be counted as advocates for truth and justice, regardless of their political affiliations. We also recognize that this is a very tall order for many. This is a dilemma that causes us to advocate for change. I am tired of being a victim of collusion by the present government and the ineptitude of the opposition in dealing with these matters. That is why I have decided to run politically as an independent candidate and tell the story about what I've discovered. The people of Saskatchewan deserve better, much better. We deserve a government that'll work for us and will do the job that we hired them to do. We need to fire the pork barrel bureaucracy that has been tolerated by this administration and elect men and women of proven integrity with business acumen and knowledge gained from real experience, regardless of their academic credentials. Our government is in the customer service business. They are indebted to the trust of every man, woman, and child in the province because we are all their creditors. The Fraudulent Preference Act only protects creditors in a bankruptcy. When our government acts as though they are being bestowed with a divine right of kings, The rule of law only applies to their absolute discretion and eminent domain. We are their creditors and become indentured servants rather than their legitimate critics. We need to open the books to expose the crooks to face their consequences. We have a government that does not have a budget or a plan on how we are going to get out of this quagmire of economic and mental depression. Instead, our premier makes gestures about fighting carbon tax, which is a constitutional issue with no apparent avenue of recourse, but has no concrete plan to offer as an alternative. He's going to build an irrigation project. He's going to offer home improvement grants to offset the damage his party already engineered in the construction industry. We can only wonder what the cost of these stimulus packages will eventually be, or who will ultimately receive the benefit. Can we not see this as merely a smokescreen from a pipe dream for re-election? We are woefully underfunding the education system. Even before the pandemic brought serious and urgent need for financial support in dealing with a crisis that demands more space, more teachers, and more support staff to protect us from potential super spreader environments represented by schools. We are hearing we have money to give out for home renovations like hot tubs and new kitchens, but nothing to offer for the protection of new generation we are bringing into the workplace. The reluctance of our present legislature to face difficult issues brought on by the COVID pandemic has resulted in confusion and frustration within our health and care and education institutions. We see blatant inconsistencies in policymaking that demands restrictions in restaurants, theaters, bars, and churches, but leaves classrooms and those responsible for them on their own, without financial support or any meaningful guidance. This track record leaves us no confidence that our present government is capable of providing the kind of honest and courageous leadership that is so desperately needed today. This failure in leadership has been highlighted by a government that decides to reduce their sitting hours to far less than a quarter of the required time while continuing to pay itself for full-time attendance. If anyone stayed home for the first 350 days, how long would they have a job? How long would they have a business? Here we have a government that is hired to run the business of Saskatchewan that affects every man, woman, and child. Their lives, their financial futures, their education, and they are social distancing. We need to fire our government and hire people, business people that know how to operate the business of government. In the process, it has been turned back on the most pressing needs for guidance and support that we have experienced in the last 2 generations. If there ever was a time to make some difficult and potentially unpopular political decisions for the benefit of everyone, it is now. Public safety must be the precedent over political expediency. Where are the priorities? Our healthcare system is also in danger of being overwhelmed if we continue down the path of indecision and indifference to the well-being of us all. That has to be the legitimate legacy of this administration. The new Regina bypass is only the tip of an iceberg of incompetence and partisan manipulation on the part of our present legislature. We need a voice that has no political affiliations or allegiances. A voice that is not afraid to ask the awkward questions without the fear of sanction by any party, policy, police. Maybe it's time that we had unelected delegates attend in civic and provincial legislatures and present questions and propose agendas for cabinet consideration. This is supposed to be the job of any MLA, but lately it seems that they are too busy managing their career opportunities and abdicating to a bloated bureaucracy instead of simply doing their jobs. We need political oversight committees of the RCMP, the Law Society, and the Public Guardian and Trustee. We need capable and responsible people with appropriate experience in government positions. We need to hire top caliber professional staff instead of political popularity contests and loyalty litmus tests of the Public Service Commission. Order and council appointments seem to reward the popular guy with the most affluent friends to get them into a position of power where patronage trumps ability, just as we have seen in the Regina bypass scandal. We have all witnessed government corruption locally, provincially, federally, and internationally. We need to recognize the pattern of corrupt policy making exists in our own backyard. Most of the local media sources we rely on for providing information to the public have been unwilling to give us any venue to present the whole picture. Our numerous attempts to exercise our freedom of speech and ask the difficult questions using their platforms has been repeatedly denied. They seem to be lulled into complacency and want to avoid controversy at all costs. What is it going to take to get us out of this mess? I believe it's going to take people who care, as well as people with knowledge and people with business skills. People who have aligned their moral compass with the highest standards of human decency and subordination to the rule of law. We need to disinfect this third world style of government and defend the doctrines of democracy. If we open up the books to expose the crooks, the rule of law can prevail. We need to elect politically independent representation that cannot be seduced by bribes and secret benefits. Neither can they be bullied into compliance by silence. My political platform is a personal commitment to the first responsibility of government, which must be to protect the powerless from abuses of the powerful. I will stand up for anyone who seeks to improve their human condition with hard work and fair dealings. I have 40 years of customer service experience dealing with challenging issues and finding fair solutions. I do this on a regular basis, every day, 7 days a week. We need a government that rises above depraved indifference toward individuals who have suffered at the hands of their partisan supporters. We need our government working full-time and even overtime, especially during the worst crisis in our world that we're experiencing in a decade. We need our government to be held to account for the stewardship of our public trust. I believe I can be a catalyst for change. The old saying, you need to hold your friends closely and your enemies even closer, has become my mantra. If I can participate in our legislature, I will not be the one who hides from public scrutiny, which makes the rules that benefit the 1% of the people that control 97% of the wealth. I want no one to get comfortable with the status quo of indifference towards the consequences of decisions that unfairly victimize groups or individuals. We need a revolutionary change and a reformation of respect. We have the opportunity to do that here in Saskatchewan. We need to examine issues like the Regina bypass scandal, as they are an indicator of lack of integrity and transparency that have cost taxpayers dearly. Our present government has collected over $2 billion in new taxes since 2017, and yet has to roll back any portion during the economic crisis. We have watched our personal exemption formula be promised to be tied to the cost of living index, which has risen over the last several years with no corresponding increase to the exemption levels. At the same time, we have seen our utility services increase nearly 57% in many areas over the last 7 years, with an average income of Saskatchewan taxpayers have struggled to keep pace. No one I know who is an employee has experienced a corresponding increase in wages. No viable business model could sustain such costs, but we are subsidizing these services and are being forced to absorb the resulting expense. I will demand the highest standards of accountability and transparency in our government. I want to see a judicial public inquiry and a forensic audit done for what has saddled us with debt that may take us several generations to retire. I also pledge to advocate for a clear and unambiguous guidance from government when dealing with health concerns being presented by the COVID-19. As a business owner, I have real-world experience making hard decisions and balancing the needs of customers and employees with the real needs of economic survival. In spite of the many obstacles my business has been forced to face in recent years, we have managed to survive. I understand how to overcome adversity. I also pledge to be transparent in my conduct. I have pledged my public sector income to the Regina Food Bank. I'm not doing this for the salary, but to provide an example of fiscal accountability and financial justice. I believe that all of us here in Saskatchewan deserve better leadership. I believe I can provide that leadership and commit my services with complete dedication to the task. I have no obligation to any political or outside interest group. I believe I can bring a fresh set of perspectives on the challenges that have faced the Saskatchewan people today. I invite you to join me in my quest to become a fresh approach in governing and in protecting our best interests. We need accountability and transparency in government. I want to be the voice of change, to offer leadership and abandon the political partisanship that has to lead our corruption and has plagued our province over the last several decades. The solution is now in your hands. I ask that your vote sends a message demanding respect for your hard-earned dollar and better performance in terms of quality legislation. Good laws require minimum maintenance in terms of enforcement and even less judicial interpretation to become equitable fairness. We all deserve better, but we will never get it unless we believe it. I am Nestor Mryglod. I appreciate your support. I am running as an independent candidate in the Regina Wascana constituency. Thank you.